been involved with an assessment, and we are also middle states, and maybe a lot of people are middle states. We've been involved with this process for the last 5 years, since 2010. And what I'm going to focus on today is how we are communicating as faculty members. It's very much a faculty-driven process. It's supported administratively, even to the point now where we have course release for chairs for the assessment committees at the department level. But you know, it is a faculty-driven process, which we support. We, you know, personally, in the journalism department, we like that. So how are we communicating about our assessment among ourselves? We are a small department, and we're a journalism department. We have 6 faculty members, so we're small relative to other departments. But I wanted to share with you what we've learned along the way about how we're communicating about our assessment process and what we're doing. What I have found is that, or what we've been trying to accomplish in this process is multiple ways of communicating. You know, what happens with assessment is everybody's busy. We have a very busy year. It's at the end of the year. Assessment reports are due, and everyone's scrambling. That you know, that can kind of be the way this happens. So what we're trying to do is communicate throughout the year at our department meetings. The first way we communicate is face-to-face at our department meetings about what's going on. Particularly in the fall when everyone's starting up, how did we do last year, what should we be paying attention to this year? And then, you know, again at the end of in the spring semester, we're gearing up for our next report because they are due. Now they're due in June. They used to be due in May. These assessment reports. Now the reports themselves are written communication, and we also communicate through email. So we have a written form of communication, which is extremely helpful, as we all know, because it details everything that we've been talking about, and confirms and clarifies what we're talking about as faculty. And then most recently we've been involved in visual communication, creating charts and graphs of where we stand. And that again is very helpful because that gives you that, you know, in 15 seconds you can really get a strong understanding, a very sound understanding of what's going on, you know, with a particular outcome. Okay. So if you just kind of move through, and what I note here is the most effective communication. What we found is when all 3 are present. We talk about it, it's reinforced with our written communication, emails, reports, and so forth, and then later on, you know, we can, when we put a report together, you get those visuals. So I have an example I just wanted to give you. We have, it's pretty extensive, essentially, and you might be familiar with this with your own process, but we have program goals, we have learning goals, and then we have learning outcomes. We have program goals in our department are aligned with our national organization, AJNC, which has 6 program goals. So we aligned with our program goals with them, and then our learning goals are more specific, but they relate to those program goals. And then we have outcomes, learning outcomes related to those learning goals. We probably have more than 60 learning outcomes, so we have a lot. I gave you an example of 3 learning goals, okay, here. And this just gives you a sense of what a journalism department might expect. Students' ability to write, report, and use technology correctly and clearly, write clearly, and forms appropriate for the audiences that they serve, right? I mean, that's pretty basic. We want our students to be able to do that. Another learning goal, ability to correlate the journalism code of ethics into their reporting and news stories. You know, we have an ethics course that we teach, and we take that pretty seriously. And then students' ability to think critically, creatively, and independently. That is critical in today's world. Right? Most journalists are mobile journalists, they're operating on their own. So that just gives you a sense of some of those learning goals that relate to the program goals and then also the outcomes. Okay, so here's our face-to-face communication. That's our first mode of communication. Again, that's mainly at department meetings, but also for faculty who specialize in a particular area of journalism will meet and talk. You know, news reporting, publishing and layout design, multimedia. You know, so the various professors who teach those specific courses will talk about assessment and how we're doing. Again, the written communication is the report. So I'm going to go into the report a little bit. You'll see some examples. That's why I wanted to put this in front of you. So you can see, if you look here, the first page, it's a 2011. That's when that first year, academic year, 2010, 2011, that's when we first came out with our measures. So you get a sense, there's our program goals, learning outcomes. And we basically, that first year, said, how are we going to measure this, right? I mean, that's where you have to start. How are we going to measure this? What are our goals and how are we going to measure them? If you turn to the next page, and this is academic year 2011-12, you can see where we stood on some of these measures. And you can see, and I need my glasses to see. What you can see is, okay, here's one of that first program goal, which is part of the A, J, and C goals. Then you see the learning goal. Those students will know how to write correctly and clearly in forms appropriate to the audiences they serve. And then we have our first outcome. Students will structure stories in various formats. And this is traditional, but still expected of journalism students. You have to be able to write various stories in various formats, whether it's a story about a fire, a speaker, breaking news, whatever needs to be done. And you can notice school and budget stories, okay, municipal and school budget stories. That's something that entry-level journalists and all journalists are expected to be able to do. What we found that first year is that, particularly with budget stories, and I don't know if any of you teach journalism, but journalism students run from math. It's always, like numbers in math. It's like,
Comm students in general.
Comm students in general, true. That's absolutely true, yeah. So budget stories were a real area of weakness for us, okay? We set a goal. We set a target for 85%. We said, okay, we want 85% of our students to be able to do this proficiently, okay, by the time they leave here. So that was our assessment tool, their budget stories. We found the first year 70% lacked the ability to adequately write a budget story, okay, which was a little dismaying. So you can see, and what I like about this report, and maybe many of you have set this up this way, you can see, okay, that's coded as a 1. That means not met. Okay, 2 is met and 3 is exceeded. So that's a quick way of seeing, when we go through these reports, and it's a pretty big report, right, with all these measures, we just look at the 1s often, see where we are. And then you see what the proposed improvement is. And so in this case, we looked at adding more assignments, right, in the News 1 class, the very basic, we have News 1 and News 2, but the basic News 1 class, we added a budget story, they have to do it. So we did do that. So if you look at the next year, okay, 2012-2013 academic year, same learning outcomes, same target, 85%, same tool that we'll use, but drastic improvement, okay, which we were actually very pleased. About a third were above average or excellent when they wrote their budget stories. 50% were average. So that's 85, more than 85%. We slightly exceeded our goal. We were conservative and wrote a 2 as met the goal. But, what did we do? We added a budget assignment. We had them go to a municipal meeting, town meeting, and sit through a budget story. And before then, we met with the finance director of the town. They asked questions. She explained things. One of our faculty members came up with a Follow the Money guide and blogged, a big blog, answering every single question about property taxes in New Jersey. It's a very important question. We're number 1 in terms of property tax in the nation. So we have, explaining everything. So I think with all those tools, that helps turn us around. If you look at the next year, similar, 91.5%, sorry for the fuzziness here, met that goal. So we actually exceeded the goal the next year. We just continued the same process. Then we get into that visual communication. Okay, so let's just look at that same measure. The next year, what we did was, last year, we surveyed our internship coordinators to see how our students were doing out in the field. External measures we incorporated, and that's where we started to chart things. So we had that same question about various formats, and then we charted it. And in this case, they actually performed very well according to them, which confirmed, some of what we were doing in the classroom, what we were finding in our own internally measured assessment. And again, this is just a very quick way to be able to transmit information, right, and have data visually. So we're going to continue doing this. So what's the bottom line here? Again, I mentioned this earlier, but really the most effective communication happens when we use all these modes. We have busy faculty members at the end of the year trying to get a grasp. So being able to talk about it, see it in writing, and then now visually communicate it is critical for us. And then also ease and specificity, meaning ease of getting the information across and being as specific as possible so that people understand it and can actually develop strategies. That's a really important piece. Like, you don't want to just gloss over. People have to understand, no, these are areas that we really need to address and develop strategies. So that's a big part of it. And then lastly, conclusion, I want to go over positive change occurred as a result of both the communication mode that we began with. So that's all. If you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.
So we just heard from Diane Gariantis from Rowan University. I stand corrected.
No, it's just,
That's what it says.
yeah, there is a Roman college. So.
Okay, and now it's time to hear the responses. We're doing very well on time, so we'll have a lot of questions at the end, we hope. Our respondent today is Angela LaValle from Bloomsburg, University of Pennsylvania. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. As she mentioned, I'm from Bloomsburg University. I'm an associate professor in the Communication Studies department there, and I have been our assessment chair for the last 3 years. I've also served on a university-wide group that tried to write an assessment handbook for our faculty, and I've been involved in our general education program. But I wanted to, on behalf of myself and our chair and our panelists, thank you for coming this afternoon, because I know anytime people say the word assessment or program review, like, people just come running. And so, you know, just beat them off with sticks. But, I think we all appreciate your presence here today and your interest. You know, what I want to do is just kind of highlight some of the things that resonated for me in reading what folks had prepared and listening to their presentations. You know, we all know that assessment is new, but not. You know, we've all been doing it forever. Maybe in some more informal ways, but in the last, 5 years or so, there's become this urgency to now document. It's got to be documented and formalized and reported so that we can justify our existence and the quality of what we're doing. And so I think a lot of what our panelists talked about is in this climate of now, there's been this shift in ideas around assessment, and assessment has become this big buzzword in education. I thought there was an interesting juxtaposition as I read the papers between this need to develop a culture of assessment in a place where there isn't one or where people aren't being very receptive to it, and then also what Kate was saying about, well, how do we know? Maybe we haven't actually asked people what they really think about assessment. Maybe it's not that they don't want to do it, maybe they just don't know what's going on, and we maybe haven't had those conversations, but that I think all of our panelists pointed out that we can use communication to navigate that space of figuring out what's going on with everyone and also developing that climate of assessment, and that ultimately more positive communication, more positive thought around assessment is going to lead us in more productive directions in terms of doing assessment better, in terms of taking better action, and then also getting us better outcomes then as a result. I'm going to turn to each paper individually. In terms of what Kate was saying, this is something that resonated for me a lot in terms of thinking about, who are we doing this for? All right, so thinking about our audience, is this just something we're doing because someone higher in power over us has told us that we need to do it, or are we really thinking about who is this for? And if we really think about it, this is for us. So if you're the department conducting assessment, you're doing it for yourself in order to make your program better. You're doing it for your students. In order to enhance their learning experiences. And so thinking about audience and trying to figure out how can we serve those audiences, I think is really, really valuable. That we need to know what folks are really thinking. And so I think, asking students about their experiences certainly could provide helpful information in addition to some of those direct assessment measures. I liked some of the things that Kate said about creating a space for dialogue, thinking about audience so that we can create a dialogue, and instead of thinking about assessment as something we have to do, kind of embracing it as an opportunity for having these conversations. Marianne talked about, I love this commitment to excellence, right? That, and she mentioned that when faculty members think about things like, okay, applying for tenure, applying for promotion, that we don't say, I think you should give me tenure or promotion because I'm doing a mediocre job of teaching and research and service. But if we're going to expect excellence and other people are going to expect excellence, that's what we should be trying to do in everything, and not just for assessment, kind of do it halfway just to say that we did it, to say that we reported some data, even if that data is not all that informative. And so I liked the idea of thinking about it as something that we should do with excellence, but also something that is going to enhance the excellence of our programs. And I also liked that assessment should be directed by faculty with support from the administration, not the direction of the administration. And that's been a big thing on our campus, with looking at assessment as something that you're required to do, and I'm going to have to do it in this way, versus academic freedom. Right? Not just that I have this unique case, but now you're infringing on my freedom to do what I want in my classroom with my students. And so it's, again, this interesting space that we have to figure out how to navigate. And I think framing it in terms of, this is something we should be trying to do with excellence, might help us manage that space. I really empathized with Stacy's presentation as someone who comes from a university that is also accredited by Middle States, that also has a union, that was put on monitoring, not quite warning, but we were under monitoring, and then the talk about having to make changes really quickly. We got a whole brand new gen ed program in a year in order to respond to Middle States concerns about assessment or the lack thereof on our campus. And so I don't know if Stacy mentioned this, but she had talked in her paper about using a systems theory approach to understand this whole process. And that we know from general systems theory that systems are resistant to change. Objects that are not in motion are going to want to continue to stay not in motion. And so that's part of what makes it really challenging. Is, it seems like we're trying to, change everything about what we're doing, when in fact, we're just trying to do it in a different way than maybe we're used to. And so I liked, the idea of, thinking about how leadership and appropriate leadership could really drive that. And that it's not about, or it shouldn't be about, leadership exerting control over the process, but that instead it should be about leadership helping to manage the perceptions of what's going on, and to help manage communication and think about what the value, the meaning is in the process, as opposed to thinking about it just as something that you have to do. And it's not just about exchanging information, but it's about actual communication, which kind of goes back to the mindful deliberation. We're not just going to throw information at each other. Let's actually have thoughtful communication about this process. It's the only way that we're really going to get anything done. The best way we can do that, if we look at Diane's paper, is have multiple ways of communicating that. When I read her presentation, it reminded me of how we try to teach to different learning styles. That if we want things to be understandable, we have to communicate it in multiple ways. I know when I get assessment data and I share it with my department, a lot of what I get from our general education program is statistics. And then I have to try and translate that for all the rhetoricians, not to pick on the rhetoricians, or the journalists. Right? I have to figure out how to translate that into, okay, so how can we understand this in terms of making it useful? And so having these multiple modes of communication is going to help us do that. And I liked the idea about getting specific. Right? What works, what doesn't? If it doesn't work, let's fix it. And again, that's goes back to audience, right? This is not just for this, amorphous, administrative accrediting body. Let's figure out what's not working so we can fix it and we can be our own audience. And so I like the idea of getting specific, getting specifics, discussing the issues, so that if they need to, departments can make changes to make things better. So I think as a whole, looking at communication and how we communicate in this process, whether it's through thinking about who your audience is and how to best craft a message, or thinking about how we can do this in more thoughtful ways, or how leadership can appropriately communicate things, or using multiple modes of communication, all of those are things that are going to move us forward in the assessment process, which ultimately just benefit departments in terms of improving our programs and also enhancing the learning for our students. So again, thank you for coming to the panel. I hope you have lots of interesting questions for our panelists. I certainly, as I said, lots of things that they wrote about and talked about resonated with my own experiences, so hopefully they did for you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Our respondent, Angela Lavallee from Bloomsburg, University of Pennsylvania, and now the floor is open for questions. Please feel free to raise a hand and address the panelists.
I'm one of those people who crossed over to the dark side and then went back to the side of light and good. And I'm also from a school that went on mourning from Middle States. I have a feeling we may all have the same vice president at Middle States. Because she's noted for putting schools on mourning. In terms of audience, what I found on both sides of light and dark is that when it comes to program assessment, general education assessment being different, and by the way, I like your new gen ed program.
Thank you.
I found that faculty generally have 3 audiences. For those that have an accrediting body other than the regional, such as Middle States, such as medical programs, for them, that accrediting body, outside accrediting body, becomes their major target audience. And having seen the reports vary, because those programs typically have a software that they have to use, and sometimes the software generates what I would view as useful data, other times not. For other programs in our time of dwindling populations, such as theater, administration, we've got to justify our existence, otherwise we're going away. And the third audience, the administrative black hole. Would you agree? Or would you see those as the 3, from a faculty point of view, the 3 primary audiences currently?
When you say the administrative black hole, do you mean?
It's
do you mean
generated
kind of
for the
like-
sake of generating it, so they could say they generated it.
Yeah.
I would just add, I think for us, I think all those 3 are correct. Because you don't get feedback back from the report, so it does feel like a black hole. You sort of submit it and that's it, and you don't hear anything, and you just, but I think for us, I think the other audience is each other, the department level. I do feel that, because it gives us a chance to see how we're doing and what we could be doing better, and even like feed off of each other. Like if there's a weakness in one area, we can talk to like somebody teaching another area who had no idea, and we even have a lot of adjuncts that we can communicate that to. So it's actually beyond our full-time, ourselves.
And I think because we were on morning very recently and just recently got off of it, we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
I think we're getting there in terms of our gen ed, because our gen eds are college-wide, and we have a committee of people that get release time to be in charge of it. We call it CWAC, College-Wide Assessment Committee. We discuss it every semester at in-service, the results of the previous semester. So I think we're there in terms of gen ed. In terms of program and within the departments itself, for us, I'd have to say it probably varies from department to department.
If I could elaborate on that and then maybe add a 5th one to bring us full circle, is I do think the faculty are an important audience that we need to consider, because all too often it's too easy to focus on our courses, or I work with departments where their curriculum is really determined, not correctly, by basically, here are the courses I'm going to teach, so therefore the required courses for the major are. It's not outcome driven at all, it's based on what the faculty want to teach. So to move faculty out of their own individual classrooms to more of a collective sense of ownership around the curriculum for their students, and particularly in departments that might be merged, so you might have theater, speech, and communication or journalism. I think that becomes really important for there to be this larger collective sense, because then again, you're interested in what's happening in your classroom as it relates to the larger whole. The fifth audience I would offer up is I don't know if it's your admissions office or prospective students or parents of prospective students, but with the dwindling number of traditional age undergraduates, the competition is greater. And because of the Department of Ed and others, transparency and student right to know, parents have become much more, I think, educated consumers of that. So they're much more likely to ask. So again, if I send my student to your school and or they enroll in your program, what will they learn? Or really, sometimes they skip over that question too. So will they be able to get a job that will afford them the, an income that will allow them to pay off the student loans, that we're going to take out. So I've noticed, I think that's a little bit of a growing trend. So from a departmental point of view, maybe getting it administratively, but if you want to work with your admissions departments to get more students not only at your school or college, but within your program, you want to maybe partner with admissions, but they need something to help tell your story. And this is where I think some of the narrative and the visuals and things can be useful. So I would add them as a fifth audience.
I have a question that kind of piggybacks off that of the confusion of audience, because I had the concept of administrative black hole. This is kind of interesting, Diane and I, we come from the same university and we've given the same template, although as I was looking at it, like, we use it differently. We have to apply it differently, but we've never been told that we're using it incorrectly, so they haven't. But we actually, and I'm the chair of the assessment committee in my department, we were having a conversation about how to approach this, whereas one approach is far more in line with the faculty audience of how can we reflect and develop, and the other is far more, can we make this accurate for the presumed administrator of what are you really doing? And the dilemma that we were having is that we have kind of divided in specialty in our department. We have both quantitative and qualitative and scientific and humanistic, and we want our students to have an awareness and appreciation of both, and we have certain qualities that we want students to have with reference to both. But one of our members of the assessment committee says, well, how could I be an appropriate evaluator of work that isn't in line with my tradition? Shouldn't we just have the people who teach those courses be the ones who basically log the percentage of students that are meeting expectations or not, with an orientation towards accuracy? As in, we're going to report to administration, here's an accurate measurement of who's getting it, versus the other orientation which we historically have is, well, each of us as faculty have expectations of other classes. And even though I'm trained as a quantitative scholar, I can appreciate, or I'm looking at a rhetorical criticism, and I have certain expectations. And potentially I can evaluate that assignment and say, is that meeting what I expect or not meeting what I expect? And I say, even if it isn't technically correct or accurate of it not meeting, it compels a conversation amongst us as the people teaching rhetorical criticism and say, well, what about this isn't meeting expectations? What do you think that we teach in this? And so we have this dilemma. And I guess what I'd ask is, is there more of an orientation towards accuracy with the way that you all have approached assessment? Or has it been more of an orientation of trying to recognize what it is that we commit to, what it is that we value, what it is that we think that our students are getting from the other courses or perspectives, or at least how you balance those two things, or balance the audience? That makes sense.
I think it's interesting that that you are evaluating outside your area.
Okay, so you would say it'd be
Yeah.
more appropriate people who have the expertise.
Well, the way that we do it is more, using embedded assessments, or when we do portfolio assessment, we would have, the journalism professors look at and rate the journalism portfolios, even though I teach the senior seminar. So it is collaborative, and yet the people evaluating what it should be, are in those areas, and then we bring it to the department, but we do let people kind of do their evaluate their own specialization. But I think that that could lead to a lot of really productive conversations with your colleagues about, you know, what you're teaching and what, you know.
Because yeah, we do portfolios as well, but the thing is, they're not allowed to just be one or the other. They have to have both demonstrable skills with regard to quantitative knowledge and qualitative knowledge. They have to be able to interpret a text, understand the power of language, yet also be able to make an argument with and in response to statistical information. So we kind of have a dilemma that the same portfolio could speak to these different types of expertise. And we thought, well, should we segment off portfolios, send the quantitative stuff to the quantoids, and send the rhetorical stuff to the rhetoricians, or, which would lead to a greater degree of accuracy, more for that administrative audience, or assuming that it is the administrative black hole. I'm in a place of cynicism right now, and I'm orienting more towards, well, let's have the conversation, because no one's really reading these anyway, they're just wanting to say we did it. That's me, but anyway. But you would say that you would orient more towards accuracy. People in the appropriate specialty are the people who are evaluating that particular work.
Well, I think that's an interesting case. I mean, do you think, I guess I would put it back to you, and I'm interested in what you all do in this, but is it reasonable to expect that all the professors in your department have the competency, at least at an undergrad level, of, you know, processing the quantitative and the qualitative? I'm not sure that seems terribly unreasonable.
Well, just in response to that, that's that orientation towards accuracy. And we're saying, and I'm saying the other side of it could be of, is it about spurring a conversation of, is a class doing what I think it's doing? For instance, I'll reference, you know, my research methods class, I'll talk about rhetorical criticism. And I may be talking out of my butt as to without really having ever seen the work that they do.
Right.
Or having ever applied, here are the things that I should be seeing, can I see these things? And if I'm not, people teaching rhetorical criticism can have a conversation of why is it that you're not having this? Whereas we're kind of not considering accuracy, we're just reflecting on what it is that we value. Whereas I guess what you're saying is no, accuracy is the name of the game.
Well, I guess I'm coming from an assumption of accuracy, and I want you to speak, but I want to tell you, don't give in to cynicism either, just because you don't get feedback. You know, what can your department do with it, and what can you learn about students?
This is how I'm actually keeping faith in it, because we've had some fantastic conversations. We've changed our goals tremendously over the conversations that we've had of what others have thought people are supposed to get from my methods classes. I've changed the way I teach it, because they're clearly not seeing something that I've been blinded to because I'm in the middle of the trees here versus someone from the outside. So we've had very productive conversations, but it hasn't had an orientation towards accuracy. Versus if there was somebody actually wanting to know accurately how many people are meeting this expectation, wouldn't be quite as.
I'm going to borrow from Tracy's general systems theory and say it's a both and. Because if you think about assessment as really being both formative and summative, and I think you can apply that both in terms of its measures. I think you can apply that toward the process of assessment. So from the faculty's point of view, what you're talking about with these conversations is formative. So people outside your quantitative expertise can still have some level of appreciation, but at the same time you want to draw some summative or evaluative conclusions, and that's probably what the administration and certainly external accreditation wants. So I think you can have both, because one of the ways that you get at that, if you will, accuracy model is if you train people on the rubrics, you know, and you orient them to however you're operationalizing your terms, if there isn't the same degree of inter-rater reliability is what you're looking for. So I think you can, it's a both and so if you're kind of further apart from inter-rater reliability, so use that as a formative opportunity to further develop those conversations with your faculty, and as you do it, then again, I think you get greater confidence, because now it doesn't matter if, because again, think about, unless you have a lot of people teaching the class, some of the artifacts are going to come from your class. So you've graded them, now you're evaluating them. Some people would argue using multiple reviewers who aren't the instructors of record, there's an advantage there. So again, I think both and, you can look at it and use it in different ways for different purposes, but it allows both for accuracy as well as a real opportunity to engage the faculty more broadly in some formative and really useful conversations.
If I might, this is perhaps taking it in a different direction, but our mission is increasingly expanding to cross-disciplinary learning, not just in gen ed, but programs of study that are inherently multidisciplinary. How do you assess those? We haven't even quite figured out how to load them fairly, let alone how to assess, and those two are related. And I think that's going to become increasingly the pressure, particularly on some universities. And I think it's a good move in terms of seeing how things connect that ordinarily do not. We have an energy miner that's just been approved, and it has 6 different academic programs. Good luck with that one. And I'm one of the people teaching it. So have any of you had to deal with assessment for inherently multidisciplinary programs?
Yeah, so one of the majors that is sort of housed in our department is a digital media major, but we have an interdisciplinary major that is shared in computer science, communication, and the arts. And I find that it's very difficult to manage. The dean of the arts, and I'm in the School of Humanities, dean of the arts kind of owns that assessment. And I think that's actually a limitation to what we're able to do and the coherence that is in that program. And so aside from the random meetings that we have in this digital media committee, there is no connection among all the areas, and digital media students don't, I think, have a sense of common identity. You know, the way that classes are framed is not as coherent for them. So I think it's actually really problematic because of our organizational structures. They're structured around departments,
right,
managed by, you know.
And this one particularly involves 3 different colleges within the university, not just multiple departments within arts, humanities, and social science. So like the one you're describing, with 2 different deans overseeing it.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not very positive about that. I think
I do
think
think
it has
it's
really
a really
structural
big challenge.
challenges.
Yeah, and I don't think that academics broadly defined look beyond their own areas. So when we get back to what he's calling the accuracy is the primary area, I think we might be falling behind what's likely to be the bigger challenge in the future. But that's what we're dealing with. I'm not saying we have any answers, obviously. We're just wading through it in the beginning.
I have a very simple, practical question for Diane. Is your department, unit accredited? Are you an accredited program?
We are not accredited with the agency by choice in the sense of that's a very complex and some would argue outmoded process. The agency accreditation, I don't know if people are familiar with, a lot of major journals and schools that are not accredited for that reason. But we are, the university as a whole, and our summer is part of that.
Because we are the same way. Our department is not accredited because it combines mass communication, which includes journalism and communication studies, which is different. And these faculty members are resistant to the idea because AJMC accreditation would potentially take away from some of the variety, diversity.
That's right. Yes, yeah. And even within journalism departments, it's a very complex process, time-consuming, and some would say outdated. Some would argue that. So
I'm
you
going
have it. Yeah.
to make some of you feel from Middle States better. I'm from Creighton University, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, so we're Higher Learning Commission, which is the largest with 19 states and 1,010 institutions. I serve as a peer reviewer for that. And so every year we get to see, so what were the areas of greatest deficiency? Much like your experience, so I don't know if it's tied to one vice president within Middle States, although sometimes it might be. The number one site, the 3 citations is typically assessment of student learning, whether it's gen ed or at the programmatic level, and that's where we tend to evaluate. If it leads to a degree, you're awarding a degree, there has to be evidence of student learning at that program or degree level, followed by kind of the strategic planning, because again, do you have one? Are you actually engaged in it? Is it realistic? Isn't it producing changes? And the thing that was just added in our latest accreditation, make you feel better, is not only do you have to look at the academics, but now we have in some of the subcomponents at least 3 areas where co-curricular learning must have explicit evidence as well. So again, the idea that again, wherever and however students are learning, whether it's inside the classroom, outside, online, the various modalities. So you are not alone. I can't speak for SACS or the Western states or NEASC, but you are not alone in Middle States.
Chances are, based upon my limited knowledge, it's going to be similar from regional accrediting body to regional accrediting body. Because the feds are going to expect them to hold the same bar. across the United States.
And that's where it's coming from. I think, to be honest, Higher Learning Commission, because we were one of the first and have accredited more fully online Phoenix among others, we really have the scrutiny in terms of those particular standards more so than others. But it's clearly coming from the Department of Education, and their rating system and these other things that are not yet well developed are also going to continue to add to that heightening of the bar, whatever that bar may look like.
Yeah, when I was on the dark side, I went to some middle states, regional conferences and training sessions, etc. And middle states was honest. It's like, we're doing it because the feds are making us do it. It's that simple.
Or the
But if we don't do it, we lose our accreditation, therefore you automatically lose yours.
Or you all get to work directly with the Department of Education, because that would be such a pleasant
Oh,
experience.
That's what the conversation became in our department. We have been kind of on the front end of the assessment vote, I guess, in our university that's been, look, we can decide to do this now, or we can wait until somebody else comes in and then tells us we have to do it this particular way. And so, you know, when you're talking about having those conversations, I like the idea of being able to do it accurately, but also using that to have a conversation about, okay, so is this what we really want in the department? Because then at least you get to make the decisions. Even if the information goes to the black hole, you know, at least use it for something.
Yeah.
So that it wasn't a waste of time.
I would actually argue,
Yeah.
using it's great, and yes, we should use it. But another important thing that I think everyone needs to take back to their college, if you're not already doing it, is don't lose it.
Right.
Because we went on morning because we had done assessment, stopped it, done it, stopped it, done it, stopped it. They put us on morning. We're doing it now. But when we started redoing it, and we formed the CWAC, College-Wide Assessment Committee, they said, okay, give us all your assessment data, and where was it? So ultimately, we purchased an assessment management tool, TK20, so that we could house all assessment in one place, so we would never lose it again.
We ran into that. We had a dean of our college who was there for like a year and a half, and apparently he shredded everything when he left.
Well, that's just it. We lost a lot of people because people retired and they took their flash drives with them.
Yes. So having some place central where you can keep that good.
You know, part of the audience conversation, it brings back memories of years and years of deliberation about assessment. We're on the same page with all of you. Is it something that we do for compliance, or is this something that we can use for our own improvement? And faculty were overwhelmingly suspicious, you know, that the Big Brother is following us because we are under Big Brother, SUNY Central, who actually disappeared at some point and shredded everything, including our program description, register. Now we have to re-register because what they know of us is accurate as of 30 years ago. So now we're using this opportunity to change our program completely, since we have to re-register. But the creeping idea is that, is the administration going to use assessment data to punish faculty? Who's going to see it and who's going to do anything about this? That has been the fear. So
That was a fear at my college too, and especially when our board of trustees put it in college expectations. Every college employee will participate in assessment. But I think for us, the word has finally gotten out. No, as long as you're doing assessment, you will not be punished. You will be punished if you do not do assessment.
okay, so it's 3:15. We can continue talking after the session, but it has been my absolute pleasure to serve as your convener or panel chair. It's been pretty easy because you all seem very interested and knowledgeable. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And this concludes our session. Thank you.